and welcome to Inside the Admissions Office, the official podcast of InGenius Prep and your go-to resource for expert admission strategy. My name is Jillian, and I'm excited to be your guide through this wild ride of college admissions. Each episode, I'll bring you insights from former admissions officers who know the ins and outs of getting into your dream school and their firsthand experiences reviewing applications. Our strategies have helped countless students gain acceptance to top universities, and we're here to help your students gain that competitive edge and do the same. Whether you are just starting your college prep journey or knee-deep in applications, we've got you covered. So grab your notebooks, pencils, and maybe a cup of coffee. Let's dive in. Hi everyone, welcome back to Inside the Admissions Office. Today's episode is all about guiding high school students through one of the most exciting and sometimes overwhelming parts of the college journey, researching and building a college list. Today, we're diving into the world of liberal arts colleges and helping students figure out how to select schools that align with both their academic and personal goals. If you've been following the podcast for a while now, you may already be familiar with today's guest, Krista. She's no stranger to us, and we're lucky to have her back to share her expert insights. Krista brings years of experience from her time in admissions and is passionate about helping students find their best fit colleges. Whether you're just starting your search or already narrowing down your options, she's got a ton of great advice to share, like this one.
When you're putting together your application and you're thinking about whether this might be a good fit, don't just think about, will I get in? How can I craft myself to get in? But instead, how can I shape myself as a candidate, as a student, as someone in the classroom, as to be a good student there? Think about being a good student versus being a good applicant.
And this.
The students that I've admitted to liberal arts colleges and that I've seen even through InGenius be admitted are students who do have a very clear vision of what they want to do. They've been doing community work. They're asking complex questions that will take a team of thinkers to address, things like inequality in housing, but it's often difficult to settle on one major. And that's often the student who excels at a liberal arts college.
All right, let's get into it. Krista, welcome back. For our listeners who may be new to the podcast or may not know you as well, can you briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background in admissions?
Sure. My name is Krista Pickett, and I have been doing admission, college counseling, test prep tutoring for about 10 years now, since I graduated from what was my dream school, Williams College, and I fell into what became my dream career, admission counseling. So I went to Williams, a liberal arts college, loved every minute there for 4 years, and became an admission counselor. That's where my role for 2 years, reading thousands of applications, traveling to recruit on behalf of the college, speaking with students domestically, internationally, and then most importantly, having a role, a voice in the admission committee, having a vote there, and learning how decisions are made. I saw what the process looks like when you can only accept something like 12, 15% of students. I think it's even less now actually at Williams, when something like 8 out of 10 students would make really positive contributions. It's a puzzle that doesn't always seem to fit, so I was curious. It almost takes a liberal artist in order to understand how that works. But I switched sides of the desk and started working in college counseling. So counseling students and families directly through the process, building a list, making their candidacy the greatest it can be. And the key to that is in exploring, pursuing their passions. And we'll talk about this more when we talk about liberal arts, but liberal arts admission officers simply want to see that students are really nerdily excited about going to college. The life of the mind, asking questions for the sake of it, reading just to be informed, and having discussions late at night is something that they're naturally going to gravitate toward. So that's something I try to cultivate in my students while they're in high school, is exploring those interests so that they can hit the ground running when they're in college. And so I've been on the college counseling side of things now for about 8 years. I carry my nerd card proudly. I also do some SAT and ACT tutoring. My favorite part to work with students is their essays, because I think that's a place where they still have very much a voice in their application to tie it all together as a framing piece to let admission officers know, to help them make sense of their activities and the decisions curricularly and otherwise that they've made throughout high school. But I got into this role because I think it's an interesting puzzle. it was rewarding for me, the first in my family, to go to a school like Williams, to go to a 4-year college, to see the other side of this, and to open the door for students behind me too. I was 2 years in admission at Williams and 6 years total in Williamstown. And then I moved to South Florida, where I did the college counseling, and I've been with InGenius now. This is my 3rd admission cycle.
Wonderful. So to start, let's dive into what makes liberal arts colleges unique. Can you share a brief overview of defining characteristics of why liberal arts colleges are such great options for students, and how do they differ from larger research universities in terms of the student experience and academic opportunities?
Liberal arts, I think, also gets a little bit of it's a misnomer, right? So let me explain what it means. Liberal meaning just you're free, right? You're liberated to study across the curriculum. And it's a curriculum that is arts and sciences. So there were some days as an art history major where I was drawing and painting all day, but most days I was taking classes across the curriculum, because that's the entire point of a liberal arts education. So liberal arts is short for liberal arts and sciences. You can major in anything from the humanities, social sciences, all the way through STEM, math. And in fact, I was, as I mentioned, an art history major, although I made stops along the way at political science, psychology, religion, English, Spanish. But some of my best friends were computer science, math, biology, I believe was one of the more popular majors at Williams, economics, French and bio, double majors, really interesting combos, even some triple majors. But all of us were there because we understood the point that we had 4 years of this precious undergraduate experience, and we came in with goals and plans, but we were open to them changing, open to our minds being changed. And I think that's what liberal arts colleges really understand. They understand that students are there for 4 years to learn, to grow, to learn how to ask questions, how to be the sort of professional and the academic thinker that they'd like to be, but that they might not completely know the major or the path at 18 through 22. I certainly didn't. And so it's a space to cultivate that thinking, the ability to ask questions, truly to get to know oneself, I think, too, and to be exposed to disciplines that one didn't realize had connections. The purpose is to graduate that well-rounded learner and thinker who can solve all kinds of problems that come his or her way, and to be prepared not just for the first career out of school, but for probably the 9th and the 10th, because one thing that we talked about a lot was that in this evolving landscape, not only of admission, but also of technology and the world and the problems around us, we need people who are dynamic. I believe it was actually either the dean at Columbia or the dean at Brown, which is not technically a liberal arts college, but many of these bigger universities espouse this belief as well, which is that the best graduates will have explored widely in order to solve problems within their discipline from multiple perspectives. I forget which dean it was, but he said something to the effect of, you want a biologist who can discuss literature and a poet who understands statistics. That's going to be necessary in the world where we live. Of course, I'm biased, but I do think that liberal arts colleges have it right in terms of being small, nurturing spaces where they recognize college is not the beginning of a student's academic journey, and it's certainly not the end. It's a space to bring people together around a shared community. As you mentioned, liberal arts colleges tend to be smaller than the traditional university. That has benefits and drawbacks depending on you as a student. But certainly the benefits include that rigorous culture of intellectualism, potentially of debate, but also community. Like I said, some of my better friends were people not in my art history classes, but people that were thought differently or brought different things to the table from different disciplines.
I like that you mentioned liberal arts colleges are all about academic freedom and exploration, but for high schoolers who are interested in applying in the future, how do they craft their essays and personal statements that show why they're a perfect fit, even if they're undecided on a major?
How does one look like a liberal artist on paper? That's definitely a journey that can be traced probably even before high school. I think many students are liberal artists at heart and don't even know it. In fact, many who don't go to what are traditionally liberal arts colleges end up looking for liberal arts qualities in bigger colleges and universities. The way to do that is simply to have multiple interests and a desire to connect them, or at the very least, an unwillingness to be siloed into only one discipline. I'll use Williams as an example. There's not currently a supplement to express your undying devotion to Williams, even though if one could have back in the day, I would have. But instead, I think that's shown by activities, course selection, and especially teachers who can advocate for students in their letters of recommendation and testify to the fact that they're these bigger picture thinkers who, yes, might be headed down a certain track. Maybe they're interested in STEM or business or whatever it is, but they would either miss studying this other subject or they're known for coming at these conversations from multiple perspectives, and they tend to seek these kinds of opportunities out themselves. What might appear as disjointed activities might actually be the side effects of being a liberal arts student at heart. And then the key is to find ways to connect them to show that you're the same person, curious, interested, problem solving. I think a lot of liberal arts admission officers would also look for caring, compassionate, community-oriented people. If you're that person across disciplines, then the liberal arts really might be for you. Let me also say, too, that if you are very certain that you want to study astro or econ or Spanish, whatever it is, the liberal arts can also be for you. It's a place where you can study that thing wholeheartedly, but you can also carve out the context in which you learn it yourself. Many liberal arts colleges actually have an open curriculum, which Amherst is a very famous open curriculum where students are allowed from the get-go to choose their courses. So unlike being told what to do or take certain classes, even as this major, right away they have control over what they learn and when, and certainly over how they integrate it. And liberal arts colleges trust students to want to do that and to seek to integrate knowledge not only for themselves but for others.
On the topic of exploring academic interests, in a previous episode with Bruno, we discussed the stereotype of highly competitive students at schools like Harvard. With that in mind, I'm curious, what types of students thrive in the environment of a liberal arts college? What unique qualities or interests tend to set them apart from the rest?
The students who thrive are willing to look past the label of liberal arts, which, as I said, often is misunderstood as being limited to the arts, or maybe even the misconception that students who go to a liberal arts college are undecided about what they want to do or how they want to impact the world. There's a difference between being undecided about your major, which matters very much for 4 years, and a difference about being undecided about how you want to move through your educational space and the impact that you want to have in the future. The students that I've admitted to liberal arts colleges and that I've seen even through InGenius be admitted are students who do have a very clear vision of what they want to do. They've been doing community work. They're asking complex questions that will take a team of thinkers to address, things like inequality and housing, but it's often difficult to settle on one major. And that's often the student who excels at a liberal arts college, is they have a very clear vision or path or a strong leadership background, and certainly great grades, love to read, are interested in class discussion, and are not interested in sitting in the back of a big empty classroom or a crowded classroom, but are going to come to the forefront in speaking to professors, to each other, and possibly even change their minds. In fact, we were a little bit weary when reading applications if a student was too committed to majoring in a particular thing. We want you to come to Williams open and change your mind. Certainly to explore the things that you're interested in, but to take advantage of the opportunities that are available there too. That's why it's very important for students to understand what liberal arts is, understand they can get a touch of it in a lot of different environments, and to be open to that experience and what it avails to them insofar as growing as a learner or communicator, and not just the degree they graduate with.
I would love for you to dive deeper into this one. Are there particular qualities or interests that seem to lead to success in these settings? Could you share any anecdotes or examples of students who thrived in liberal arts colleges?
Absolutely. Anecdotally, I'll share that the liberal arts colleges are open to students without the traditionally robust leadership backgrounds. They're open to quieter leaders, students who are community-oriented. Students that I've seen also thrive tend to have a number of tiered interests, some that they maybe prioritize more than others, but some that are at the medium or lower priority tier that they're just simply not willing to give up on. And so many liberal arts colleges have competitive but not Division I athletics teams. And so a number of my students have been very content competing athletically and also in the classroom at top liberal arts colleges. Then students who, like I said, have a vested interest in issues, especially that are community oriented or socially based, that will involve complex problem solving, tend to be drawn to smaller community-oriented colleges where there can be discussions, open mic events, where you can get to know the president of the college. And so not only is the curriculum appealing to these students who tend to have strengths across the board, but the smaller sizes tend to be appealing too for the type of student who likes to go that deep into the subjects.
I really like how you mentioned that the degree is not the end point. It's such an important perspective, especially when thinking about the bigger picture of college and beyond. So when you're reviewing applications, how do you weigh a student's academic fit for specific majors or programs at liberal arts colleges? I imagine it's more than just checking off boxes, right? But how can students show that their academic passions align with the offerings at the school? And for those students who may not have a clear idea of their major yet, what advice would you give them on how to highlight their curiosity and interests in a way that resonates with admissions?
The good news is that it's very accessible to look like a good candidate for a liberal arts college because, simply put, you want to show that you have an ability to succeed across the board. So, and we talked about the 5 core subjects: English, math, science, history, and a foreign language. That's typically what most competitive applicants will have 4 years of, the 5 core subjects. You might swap one out. Let's say you're not a super linguist and you decide to instead double up in science or whatever the case may be. We trusted students to follow their passions and to have something to show for it, right? So an exuberant letter of recommendation from that teacher, or excellence extracurricularly or in competitions, or even sometimes in the way that a student spoke about a discipline in his or her writing. It was very clear that they were what we thought of as intellectually vital. They were not only intelligent, they got the grades and the scores, but they were the sort of person that would even make a professor pause and think in class. And so it's certainly through course selection, the classes that are selected, the delight that's taken in them. You can tell that by grades and also in the way teachers write about it, the way they write about the student in class, and also the way a student writes about his or her own endeavors. I think an often overlooked way to stand out to admission officers, everyone talks about the essay, and those are a very important 650 words, but the activity list is another one where you're letting the admission officer know where they might find you in 10 different instances, the highlight reel. And the way that students talk about that and the way that they showcase, especially liberal artists, when they talk about using surprising skill sets in unique places, where I guess maybe a good example would be art and STEM. A number of students will successfully combine those to purposefully show that one uses an art ability to design something that they coded for, or that they think artistically about something that they're creating, or that they blend disciplines, might come out in a description in the activity list, or in a choice to participate in something that is multiple disciplines undergirding it. And so the activity list, the essay, kind of tying it all together, why does a student make the decision to spend time doing what they do? And ultimately, as cheesy as it might sound, a passion, because as a liberal artist who studied a little bit of physics, even I know that the energy, the force that is created has to go somewhere. So if you have passion for something, it will translate on campus.
I'm sure you've reviewed thousands of applications over the years. I've probably also asked you this before, but are there any that really stood out to you, either the right reasons or the wrong ones, that still stick with you today?
There were a number of applications that I'll remember forever, and I found myself very passionate about a lot of the students that I was advocating for. I said things like, if we don't admit this student, I will lay down on the floor and die. It elicited like strong reactions in the committee room. I'll start with the negatives and they'll bring us high. So I remember one student who wrote not a bad essay about daring to try new things and breaking the status quo, but the whole essay was about how he broke a school rule and snuck onto the roof to watch the stars and showed a lack of judgment there. On the brighter side of things, there are students who wrote really moving essays about seemingly trivial things, and I think that's a gift. Students who wrote about overcoming homelessness or really tremendous struggle, and I'll remember by name and by school those students forever. I'll remember some of the students that I admitted. I am friends with them on Facebook because that's how old I am, and certainly very memorable. One that stood out to me as far as activity lists, and I felt like being a really good fit for Williams in particular, came from an online high school. She had a tremendous profile of student government leadership. What I really liked about her activity list was that she included, and I mentioned ways to bring personal detail to the forefront, and she included an activity that she had done early on in high school, but that hadn't been very successful. But it was clear that by the time she graduated, she was a great leader in student government. She'd been very productive. But she included about this drive that she'd organized, and in parentheses, she wrote, "It flopped, but I learned a lot." I thought that was a very humble, very realistic. It could belong on anyone's activity list. We all have, and it was clear that she's learned from it over the years and has had many successful drives and community initiatives ever since. Her teachers were saying the same thing, and a sense of humor goes a long way, a self-awareness, and knowing what you don't know, knowing what taught you. Not to say you have to admit to all of your moils in your activity list, but I thought that was a great example of somebody who really got it and had the humble attitude and like the modesty to do well at a liberal arts campus. And I'm sure she is.
I really liked how you mentioned fit. I think it's such an important point, and it leads perfectly into our next question. When building a college list, how should students go about researching specific majors or programs at liberal arts colleges? And while we've talked about the freedom to explore, what strategies can students use if they decide they want to focus on one particular major rather than staying too broad?
It's up to a student to be the detective. The best way, of course, is to visit, which is not always possible, and to overlook things like the weather. The number of students who will comment on how much they loved the buildings, which is important, but it's more of what you'll be doing inside those buildings and the way you feel who you're conversing with there. But lovely architecture is also a plus. But when we're visiting, I always tell my students, look at the faces of the current students. Do they seem happy? Are they walking around with friends? Do they look like they're engaged doing something that they enjoy? And of course, you can't always tell by an anecdote, but the point of visiting is to do that detective work and to do the sleuthing around and figure out, is this a place where I see myself enjoying the classes? But that's only 15 to 20 hours a week at the end of the day. So where would I study? What are my dorms like? Are there people who I find interesting and who are going to help me grow, but not through challenge or through like opposition or a challenge in a healthy way? What kinds of opportunities, particularly major professors, will I be able to take those classes that I want to take, and with what level of flexibility? And then it also comes down to values. I think everybody on our team, all the graduate coaches, the FAOs, alums that you speak to, and you ask them, why did you choose my school or this school? They're going to say, it's the people. It's the way that I felt. They had this opportunity. That's not a wrong answer. This is an art and a science, not to play off of the liberal artist. But building a college list and applying to college is a matchmaking process. I believe strongly there's no one perfect fit. I think there are multiple for students, and it's up to us to be, as counselors, to bring them these opportunities and show them the similarities between schools and the many ways that they might be happy. This is something that you're signing on to, and it is so much more than the selectivity factor, the trend of what is popular, or even what you think you might want to do when you first leave. I really encourage students to be thinking longer term about the investment they're making and taking those 4 years to figure out priorities as a reader, writer, thinker, communicator, and knowing that undergrad is going to be the beginning of a lot of their professional and academic careers. That with an investment at the right liberal arts college, you're actually vested, you're prepared to do a number of different things moving forward.
I know we briefly touched on campus visits earlier, and I think this is such an important part of the college search. What advice do you have for students to make the most out of their visits? What are some key questions they should ask, whether it's current students or staff, and what should they pay attention to that might not be obvious in brochures or websites?
Good question. When you're on campus, do an information session and guided tour if possible. We should talk to community members. In Williamstown, the college was a huge part of the town, and so interacting with Williamstown people was important to us. Knowing what I know now, I would encourage my high school self to look more deeply into the community, visit local establishments, ask about what locals think about the college. Then, of course, the freshmen, asking about opportunities that are immediately available. I'm always encouraging students to ask things that can't be quantified on a website, because opportunities can be made, but values or culture can't be changed once you're there.
Many students focus only on aiming for the top schools, but as we know, the admissions process can be very unpredictable and there's no guarantee of getting in. So can you walk us through how students should categorize their college list into reach, target, and safety schools? Why is it so important to have a balanced list, especially when the process can be so competitive?
Balance is very important in life and in college lists. Those three terms, reach, target, and safety. InGenius actually uses another one called reach for the moon, which are the very, very selective sub 10% acceptance rate schools. And it's important to have a balance because as much as we might know about a school's SAT or ACT scores, what they're looking for, we only know as much as we know. We're not in the committee room, we're not part of the institution, and we don't know all of their priorities. It's important to have a balanced list of schools, and I can't emphasize this enough, of schools that you would like to attend. We don't have safeties just for the safe, tedious work of having a safety. They are important to have because we want you to have options for next year, and it's nice to have schools to choose from. But there are too many moving pieces in order to know what's going to happen. A reach school would be considered a school where the chances of admission are slim or a little bit out of the realm of what we would possibly predict, and that could be for a couple of reasons, because the school is highly selective, because the student doesn't fall within the typical middle 50% of SAT scores or above, or simply because there isn't enough room. But reach schools are great to have because they push you to ask, what about that makes me want to go there? It can't just be the low acceptance rate. That might be something that encourages you to say, a lot of people are looking here, there must be a reason it's so highly ranked. What is that reason? And then you develop your own list of rankings from there. These are the schools that I like based on their values or the vibe. And that's important. That can't be overstated. So reaches might be based on academic or just overall qualifications or the selectivity of the school. A target would be a school that we have reason to believe a student might be accepted. And which isn't to say that isn't true for a reach. It could happen for a reach. But a target is one where the student's on track with the scores, has the requirements to be admitted curricularly, and is a good fit for the purpose of the school. A safety would be they're perhaps above the admitted threshold for grades and scores, GPA, have more activities or a stronger profile. What makes a school a reach, a target, or a safety completely depends on the student's profile. So the student's grades, the student's scores, the rigor of his or her profile. A school, I could name school A, right? It might be a reach for one student, a target for another. There are some schools that are high reaches for everybody, and I could certainly name a couple of those. You've spoken to a couple of their admission officers, places like Harvard. That's simply because it's Harvard. It's a less than 5% acceptance rate. That's always going to be a reach for the moon. You can do everything right and still not get into Harvard. That might be the case for some of the more selective schools too. And we always aim high, we shoot for the moon, knowing that we'll land among the stars. But the really important thing is that you have a mix of schools that are target, reach, and safety, but that they're all places that if you drew them out of a hat, you'd be content to go to. And that's the toughest test for most students with their college list. Of course, there are some that you're going to be more excited about, but any of them on your list, they are potentially going to earn your matriculation. So think like a smart, savvy consumer. It's not just them deciding whether they're going to take you, right? That puts them entirely in the position of power. It's also up to you to know where you want to go, why, to develop a smart plan to get there, and a backup plan, because it's actually not all about you, whether you get accepted. Sometimes, having been in that position, your hands are tied. You really wanted the student, there's just not enough room. And so that's why it's not because we don't believe in you. It's not because you can't get into a reach. It's just because that's the numbers game. That's why doing your research is important, so that you have safeties that don't feel like a backup plan. They feel just like a more likely admission that you're still excited about. And so I don't see a reason why a student should have safeties on their list that they're not excited about. Safety shouldn't be a bad word.
Before we wrap up, the college application season is in full swing, and I also know a lot of students are probably feeling a little bit overwhelmed and maybe a little bit nervous waiting for their results. What's your final piece of advice for those students just starting their college search, particularly when it comes to liberal arts colleges? Are there any key steps they should be taking right now to set themselves up for success?
So my advice for students who are either just starting the process or who are putting their applications together, beginning to think about it, would be to recall the human on the other side of the application. The human and not the institution. The person who's reading your application simply wants to see that you've met the thresholds. They're not looking for perfection. And in fact, perfection can read pretty flatly. There are a lot of students who apply with perfect grades and scores. Those are nice to have. We're never going to knock you for having those. But there's so much more to a compelling application than that. And so when you're putting together your application and you're thinking about whether this might be a good fit, don't just think about, will I get in? How can I craft myself to get in? But instead, how can I shape myself as a candidate, as a student, as someone in the classroom, as to be a good student there? Think about being a good student versus being a good applicant. And if you can prove that you're already doing all of the things to the best of your ability that you would like to do at a Williams or an Amherst or Pomona, the Williams of the West, and you prove that you're doing it to the best of your ability, if they were to trust in you and give you a spot, one of their coveted admission spots, you would make the most of it. You can know you can be satisfied in the product that you've put forth. So the best advice I can give is to find a couple of ideal fits and to focus on being that student instead of being the applicant. To explore broadly and to let that passion lead you, because inevitably if you're talking to a person on the other side of your application and sharing with them in the activity list or in the essay about why you did something, speaking candidly, straightforwardly, and letting a little bit of, if you're funny, be funny, if you're serious and cerebral, let that be crafted too. And being yourself and accepting, as hard as it is, that this is about fit, at least for holistic U.S. college admissions, it sometimes is about whether you seem like a fit for that school and whether they can take you that year. If you accept that, there's a lot more of a freeing pride that you can put into your application and say, this is who I am, this is all of the effort that I've put in. If it's a good fit, colleges will be crawling all over themselves to fight for you. As cheesy as that sounds, and I know that we're looking at a lot of statistics that are 10% of students are admitted, which I can do the math. I know that means 90% are turned away, but I tend to think that those 10% are the students that are doing everything they know they're supposed to be doing, right? There's no secret that you need the grades and the scores and to be involved, but that they're also doing it sincerely and wholeheartedly, not so much thinking about how it looks for a college application.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. Krista, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expert advice. I'm sure our listeners are walking away with some great tips to guide them in their college search. And to everyone listening, good luck with your journey, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you would like to speak to one of our experts, you can set up a complimentary strategy call with one of our enrollment counselors by following the link in our episode description. And for more information and access to additional resources, you can register for our webinars, which is also linked in the episode description. If you have any questions or would like to request a topic for a future episode, you can email me directly at jillian.yong, that's jillian.yong@ingeniusprep.com. Thank you for listening to another episode of Inside the Admissions Office, and don't forget to follow the podcast so you're notified every time a new episode is available. That is all for now, and I hope this was helpful for everybody tuning in, and we will see you in the next episode.